Good evening, everyone, and welcome to I believe it is our fourth webinar slash podcast. So thank you those who are continued listeners and welcome new listeners. So this week we are going to keep the question at bay, a little bit more simple, but complex in its delivery. So I want to ask the group, how can I be authentic when I speak? Just like that. I'm gonna open the floor immediately.
Nice. Okay, I'm going to go real quick. Me and Molly had a little of a pre-chat about this while we were waiting for the call, and I think it's very much around intentionality, and we know we spoke about that before. I think authenticity is a word that's bandied around a lot and could make people cringe a bit because it's like, oh, that doesn't mean anything anymore. But actually, at its heart, I think it is about being true to oneself. And actually, I found a lovely quote from a Kipling poem, which is, if you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings and lose not the common touch. And for me, what that means is, regardless of what company you're in, you're staying true to who you are, and therefore you're authentic, which means that what you say to the question will be authentic to your values, your background, your morality, how you really feel, and your truth, I suppose, as it might be. We also talked about this whole notion of kindness and intentionality, and maybe slightly controversially, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be nice if you're authentic. I think authenticity could have all sorts of shades, but one would hope that you were in the company of people who put their best and kindest foot forward when they're speaking in speech, because speech is so powerful when it is authentic.
Mm, mm. Yeah, and we were having a conversation, and I think something that helps me with this question is thinking about people who ask this question. And I think quite a lot of the time, people worry about whether they are authentic or how to be authentic if they feel out of place, or if they feel like they're with the kings and they're actually one of the courtsmen, or bringing it back to that poem. But if you feel like that total imposter syndrome, or if you feel like you're having to be in a place or an environment, or whether it be work, personal, where you're just totally having to become something else, to identify as the job role that you've got, rather than just trusting that you've been given that opportunity because of you. So to me, how to be authentic, or how to be authentic when you speak, is, yes, as David was talking about, this idea of trust and values, but also this idea that we talk a lot about in our training, which is, how can I just exist and speak into the space, rather than trying to be or act as someone who is an expert in this
Yeah.
thing and speaking from that place. And I think that usually is what imposter syndrome kind of breeds, is this idea of inauthenticity. Therefore, I must speak from a place that's totally not me, or I don't identify as, because I think that's serving someone else. Maybe.
Yes, I thinking about this question always stirs a particular response in me, but I go back to this. So when I first hear it, I think back to, okay, so in what environments do I feel like I am authentic, and in what environments do I feel like I'm not authentic? And then I start going even further than that, and I go, well, what does authentic even actually mean? Because then I start questioning, is it not authentic if I'm in that environment that's making me feel like an imposter, that then I am having imposter syndrome, and that's my authentic experience in that exact moment. So therefore, however it is that I'm speaking with that degree of imposter syndrome, that is still a version of me that still has the intention of whatever I am bringing in that moment, but it's just being faced with something else. And so in my opinion, I don't know that that's necessarily inauthentic. It's just that it's the version of me that is having to deal with a particular barrier, a particular boundary, that then I'm losing what might be that sense of flow, freedom, comfort, articulation, thought, because of this barrier that's kind of getting in the way. But I find it interesting to possibly think about that barrier as something to just consider and invite a way of navigating through, as opposed to going, oh no, that's horrible, that's bad, that's not me. Well, it is you, it's still you. It just has something it's trying to work through at the same time that's very present, and depending on the circumstance can range in how pressing it is and how much pressure it kind of brings. So I think of it, I mean, I come a lot obviously from the actor training background of when these challenges come up, or if you're in the middle of a scene and you have that moment where your brain suddenly thinks about, oh no, what's next? What's my next line? Oh, did that person just cough in the audience? Oh, I didn't plan for dinner, where suddenly your brain goes up into a different thought. And that instead of punishing ourselves for that moment, learn how to come back from that moment, learn how to come from whatever that distraction is and focus on whatever you need to in that particular moment. So is there something similar with this idea of inauthenticity, and if that is coming when we're speaking, of going, that's not necessarily bad or wrong, it's just something that you're facing, so therefore what are the tools that you're going to use to possibly steer the ship in the direction that you want, because perhaps what's happening in that moment is it's not being steered in the direction that you would hope it would be. So therefore, what do you need to do to adjust course?
So I'm just going to jump in there quickly, because now we've had two kind of situations in this conversation so far where the conversation has leaned towards a work situation. So I guess what I'd like to pose, because I think you're right, Brittany, there's nothing wrong with sitting in the muck of like, oh, I'm going through something. Yeah, that's okay. That is authentic, actually. If you can capture that moment and be like, even when, again, let's not make it 100% about acting and actor training, but if you forget a line, oh my God. Yeah, but isn't that a good thing? I mean, maybe not a good thing in that moment. You're nervous and scared, but whoops, all of a sudden, was I just faking it beforehand? Because now in this moment, I am genuinely looking for an answer within my scene partners because I don't know what's happening. But I'd like to pose back to the question, because I think our listeners might be curious about this, is with their, how can we continue to be authentic and then even have that question of working through it when we are at a work scenario, when there is not necessarily towards the title job, but when you're at like you're getting coffee, and then there's a social pressure and there's social norms that seem like, how do we, it's an ever moving goalpost. So when we want to be authentic, open up conversation to the team to make a team building situation, how do we approach that without the fear first, and not fear of going through it, but fear of being accepted in that social construct that we do call work and office, work and space. So I want to leave it to the team now.
I had a conversation with my friend who you guys know, Lynn. She came to our pilot course. She's now CEO of a big advertising agency. And I spoke to her about 2 weeks ago, and I said, do you know what? I've been freelance for so long, I think I'm too wild for the corporate world. And she laughed and went, yeah, well, you're always pretty wild anyway. But now I'm not even just the length of my beard, but I think, and this is very funny because I've worked in proper corporate environments and I always wasn't entirely comfortable, and I certainly didn't always behave myself. But it's interesting, the authentic version of me, if I turned the volume up fully, would be completely unacceptable in the corporate world. Because there are rules. There really are rules. It's like being in a public school. And is it real? No, it's not. It's a sham, as far as I'm concerned. I'll speak quite firmly about it. But it has to function. And if everybody did whatever they wanted, it would very quickly unpick into chaos. So I suppose, to your point, and I just wrote down here, work persona. One of the things that I've always struggled with is this, I'm now a sales executive and I have to be this sort of, and I saw other people doing it. And to your point very quickly, Brittany, about when you lose step and you lose confidence, for me, that's a lot more authentic than people who posture and pretend to be confident. That's when it becomes inauthentic. When you get people, cock on a dung heap or whatever it might be, the ego, and you see many examples, and actually I think I probably suffered this from myself when I was younger, of hiding behind this fake confidence because you're so scared, and actually being inauthentic because you're hiding behind this mask.
Yeah. It reminds me, David, of there's the exercise that we did in our training that I use quite a lot, which is the idea that we start by walking around the space and we go to two different types of people. Person one is the class clown, the big energy, the person who's the first to be heard, the first person to put their hand up, the person who will interrupt a conversation even if they don't quite know what's happening, just to be heard. And then person two is like total opposite end of the scale, much more introverted, usually the person that gets interrupted by person one, much more maybe analytical, likes to think before they speak. And we start with those two types of people because usually in a new training environment, when you're with a new group or you're in any sort of like work team environment, you'll go to one of these two characters and they are both fight flight responses almost, right? It's that fake it to make it idea is that person one of like, I'm just going to be big and be in the space and hope that that can happen. And that confidence, that work persona is going to be okay. And it's interesting to consider that that authentic place is, for me, it's the most vulnerable place to be. How can you be authentic when you speak? It's about can you feel safe enough to be vulnerable? And vulnerable doesn't mean I'm sharing emotions. It means I'm trying to not, I'm trying to catch my body from going into that fight flight space and trying to just remind myself that maybe it's not serving me anymore. Like Brittany was saying, I'm noticing it's happening. I'm not judging it and I'm bringing it into the space itself. And for me, but what's kind of interesting, because I was thinking about, okay, how does someone practically do this? Because this is really difficult that no one, will we ever master being authentic? I don't know. But we do know that in order for someone to help this kind of day to day, the first thing that comes to my mind as a coach is like, they got to prepare. And that feels so counterintuitive because we're preparing to be off the cuff, like we are preparing and we're working and we're exercising, in my opinion, to learn how to be present and how to speak off the cuff. So I think that comes in either, exposure therapy. I get so many of my clients to doing tasks throughout the week of try to say more in the next meeting in front of those senior people that you're terrified of. Try to meet a new friend when you go to get your morning coffee and just try to speak. And there's that exposure therapy part of it, which I think really helps us to get used to this fight flight response and kind of counterintuitive it, or ask it to step aside and I'm just going to be and see what happens. And there's also that level of preparation where you can sit down with someone else and go through a meeting and go, okay, I need to fight my instincts here because I know my instincts are sending me into an inauthentic or in a place that's not serving me. How can I prep that material in a way that feels more like how I'd want to present? And I think that's also authentic in a way, even though it's preparing. I don't know, you guys might disagree with me on that, but I think it's weird to know that we can help people plan how to be authentic in a way because we're trying to relearn the fight flight habit, I think.
It just also, from our conversation so far, it sounds like authenticity is something that is an ever growing experience. So what was authentic to me at an infancy age, which is probably genuinely so authentic, I'm hungry, I am tired, I need to be changed. Give me one of those things, which then can still be true when I'm 5, and then in my 30s now. But the point of view will always grow and develop. So what was authentic to me when I was haven't traveled most of the world as a teenager in Canada versus now, because I've seen the world, I've tasted the different food, I've learned a bit of history around the planet. So when you take in this information, it sounds like what your authenticity is an ever-growing development, and there is no right answer. It's always going on to the next thing. So every day you almost have to check in with yourself. Is like, what is authentic to you before even approaching work in general, like, because what was true for you yesterday might still be true, or it might have changed with some conversation you had from listening to the Now podcast, from just things that have opened your eyes to new thoughts, new development.
I think I just hearing everyone speak about this it's like my point of view towards this just gets even more and more in the direction of everybody's authentic all the time. Everybody is. Everybody is authentic all of the time. It's just they're facing a different circumstance. But that even in that environment of, so that it's not a question of how do I be more authentic when I speak? It's how do I remove a mask in an environment that I want to not wear that mask? Because I just think that everyone is being authentic even in those moments of protection, even in those moments of fear, because that fear and that protection is real. And this idea, Molly, I love this thought of like preparation. Oh, you have to prepare. So then I was kind of connecting where you went as well, Duncan, of this idea that like, so for me in this moment right now, this moment on this Monday evening, for me to feel authentic in this moment, my preparation has been my whole life. It's been every little moment to get me here. It's been every interaction that I've had, every moment of education, of training, social interaction, private, public, all of that to get me to this point. And so I think this is also why so often when we do this work, what comes up so frequently are people's personal stories, are people's personal relationships with themselves, with how they think communication exists in their life, which with how they think authenticity sits within their life, because everything leading up into this point has affected this immediate moment. This is all the preparation for this immediate moment. And I think it just more has to do with that varying degree of mask protection. But I'm also questioning that too, because I'm now equivocating being inauthentic with some sort of like block or defense. But maybe there's other ways to be inauthentic as well.
Just to riff off of you very quickly, Brittany, because I do want to get David and Molly back in this conversation. I think it is the mask. I think it's just relearning how to get that childlike aspect within us, because again, you don't find an infant that is not authentic. They're just so in the moment all the time. You see it within babies until we learn how to put those masks on. And then the question is, why are we teaching some people to put on masks, whether it's fear-based, whether it's they want to fit in. So I feel like the question, I mean, now I'm just reiterating what you said, but has nothing to do with the authenticity, because I do think a lot of people are authentic. That's why they're like, well, I can sing in the shower, and everyone can sing in the shower. But then how do we get you to sing from the shower to bring that authenticity? Like, you're relaxed, you're natural, you're just so chill, you're just in the shower, right? Into having the sing song, or metaphorically sing song, to your boss, to your coworkers, taking down that mask, relaxing, being in the moment and present. I can see go on.
You know, you hear that saying all the time, how babies never lose their voice. Babies never lose their voice because, you know, arguably they're, and Molly, you can also help me with this. They're so authentic in that moment, but not just in a like from their soul, in a way like muscularly of how they're built up physiologically speaking, that when they need to cry and scream at the top of their lungs, they will do it in a way that they take care of themselves, that they protect themselves. And I was having a conversation with someone recently, and they said, I bet your baby has never lost their voice. And I said, well, wrong. My baby has lost their voice once. And I was explaining the situation. And in the situation where my baby lost their voice was that they were very upset, overtired, and hungry, all of the things that were wrong, and driving in the car. And so they were sitting in the car, and the person went, well, yes, they were restricted. So they were sitting in a car seat that was holding them back. And that to me is such a visual representation of what we're talking about right now. Of that, had my baby not been buckled in that way, they wouldn't have lost their voice. They would have been fine. But because of that circumstance, they were being held back, they were being restricted. So therefore, they lost the freedom to be able to explore it that way and to use their voice in that way that was authentic. So it caused damage.
But I mean, your car seat is society. So I'm going to go really deep now, but it's true. Your car seat is society. We are not encouraged to be authentic, whatever that might mean. We are not encouraged to be our true selves. I've written about this extensively. This whole notion of being free is actually nonsense. We live in a world where and I'm somebody who's been accused many times, and this will make you laugh, of being slightly eccentric. And as I get older, I'm probably getting more eccentric. But I don't care, and I do it deliberately sometimes, and that is authentic, because it's sort of a knee-jerk response to just these cages that people live in, what you're expected to do, right down to the brand of trainers that people want to wear, and the uniform, and especially around here in Dulwich, you see it a lot. But without being too critical, the word that comes to mind is adulterated. If you look at that word, when you become an adult, you are adulterated by the world. You look at River, young River, you look at young children, little boy up the road who always says hello David to me, even though he doesn't really kind of know who I am. He's just the next door neighbor. There's a purity there. There's an absolute lack of filter. He doesn't care what color I am or what gender I am or any. It's just hello, how are you doing? Bang, in the now. I mean, it's incredible. And I think this notion, Brittany, is brilliant, of you can never not be authentic, because you are you, and you will always be you, and that can never be taken away from you. Like what I'm saying now, maybe slightly passionately, because I love this stuff and I really am coming to know about it, is you are the sum of all your experiences. So everything you say, even your hiding, even your fear, even your pretending to be something you're not, is still an authentic expression of your defense against the world or your bad upbringing or whatever it might be. And that's not just and obviously if you find that as an actor, just to say, it's very powerful if you can portray that. But in real life, similarly, if you can come to terms with the fact that none of us are perfect, we're not this perfect person that we're supposed to be doesn't exist. And actually, if we can lean into that, we'll maybe be a little bit more comfortable. Sorry, that was long, but this stuff's incredible.
So I suppose the question is, how do I be authentic to me and coexist and succeed with the goals that I have within the society that is strapping me in, right? Because I always think about, you guys know, I have two brothers who are non-speaking autistic. So if we want to think about authenticity as two adult men who always retain that infant-like need of, like, if I want to scream to get something, I'm going to scream, and they don't have that social cue at all, and they probably never will as they get older, just because of their just the way their brain is processed. However, I can tell you now, we can all exist as a society if we screamed for as many Pringles as they do on a daily basis because they're hungry. So it's funny to think about what we can kind of think about, and where those, I don't know, the question is like, where did those masks come in because of the constraints, or do those masks come in to succeed in those constraints of society? Like, where does that come in? And how do I know if someone's listening to this and they're going, okay, I'm with you, I'm authentic no matter what, I can love all of these parts of myself no matter what, but I've got this meeting next week that I always know that I step into this different persona and I don't like that mask, or I don't want to have that mask in that space. What happens then? What can we offer someone if they're in that position?
I mean, just a very, very quick example. So that I went to see the advertising legend, Sir John Hegarty, a little while ago, and he gave us some great advice. I did not turn up in ripped jeans and a t-shirt with paint on it. I had expensive shoes on, an expensive coat, an expensive watch. Why did I have all of that? It's a uniform that one puts on. I'm very cognizant of the fact that it's basically nonsense, but I did it for him as much as for me. It made me feel more confident, strapping on one's corporate armor and all that stuff. It's very real. It's like dressing for a part in a play. And I think if you can see it like that, and he appreciated my good humor, my, manners, all of that good stuff, and the fact that I was dressed nicely, as was he. I think if you can see it as a piece of theatre and lean into it, then it is authentic. Because I authentically wanted to have the best meeting I could. And the only way to do that in certain environments is to put the armor on. It might be a suit, it might not be. I've been to clients where if it's a cool agency, the last thing you do is wear a suit. You wear cool trainers or whatever. So you have to be a bit of a chameleon, I think.
And that goes to Molly's point, I think, about prepping. And I think every situation in its design is going to be different prep. But again, going off a quick example of what I experienced recently, I genuinely bumped into someone who was in the film industry, and I will leave names out. And I was just kind of like, oh my gosh, how do I come across as someone who is intelligent and knows films and is a filmmaker myself, within my acting and writing? And I was, I was being a good listener, but I'm like, why don't you just like in my head, which is being not authentic, because I'm just in my head rather than in the conversation. And I said, just be you, man. So like, film, film history, this person's in film. Why don't you just go off of that? So why, instead of being inauthentic and saying, how do I get this person to like me? Why don't you just be like, so who are your favorite directors? And then having a natural, authentic conversation. We found both, like in that moment, it was kind of like mental gymnastics where I was like, what is the prep in this moment versus like what you were going through, David, where you had this meeting with this agent, and you wanted to be like, okay, well, this is my prep for this situation, of society situation, for yourself feeling good. So it's kind of like understanding what in a way society expects and demands from us, and then having every situation being adaptable, but also knowing and prepping in the right, correct way.
I love this question, Molly. I think it's great. This idea of, someone who's quite confident, feels like they know themselves, very authentic, but yet they're in these particular situations and that they know that they're wearing the mask and they don't want to wear it. I would probably start from a place of going, okay, why is that mask coming on? For what reason? And so trying to get to the root of that. Is it because what we're talking about right now, which is more of whatever those external pressures are, is it because of a particular environment that you're in that it feels like that has to come on? Is it just happening naturally without an awareness that it's really kind of coming on, something that's happening internally that's more has to do with imposter syndrome, self-doubt? So is it an internal source? Is it an external source? And I feel like possibly getting to the kind of root of that, if you can even, and which might take some time, to understanding what the root of that is, then I think sometimes the answer can be that's what it is. That if it's, especially if it's something that's responding to an environment where it's like, okay, well, you have a choice. That's the environment that you're in. And sometimes that has to be there versus other times maybe not. But I think it kind of depends on where exactly the source of that mask is coming from. And therefore, if maybe that person can have a clearer understanding of its presence, then maybe they can either come to terms with it being present more often, or they can start doing some of the work to remove it. But without knowing exactly what it's responding to, I think it would be really difficult to try and figure out how to navigate through that.
I would say the keystone to a lot of this stuff, or the cornerstone, is honesty and courage. Because I think it requires a lot of honesty and courage to come. And I speak for someone who's done quite a lot of work on myself over the last couple of years, I suppose. And we're all doing work, but I think it takes a lot of honesty and courage to face warts and all. And I'll speak for myself because that's probably the only person I can speak for. To come to terms with what I call the fakery in my life, the posturing, and the older I get, the more I hate that. I hate that sort of strong word. I dislike that within myself. And I think I'm really hard on myself as well. So that's not very fair to me. But I feel confident that I've got rid of a lot of it. But when it does come up, I wince. It makes me go, ooh. And when I see it in other people, which you do see, I try not to be judgmental, but that's really hard. But I think to your point, yeah, what is the motivation for the mask? Do you live with it? But again, it's being honest with yourself. Why is that mask there? Why do I feel I have to be? But also self-preservation. For example, if you were, I don't know, in a nightclub, you would maybe behave differently than if you were walking around a maximum security prison, than you would if you were at a funeral, than you would if you were at a wedding, than you would if you were on stage, than you would if you were in your office on your own. You would have to, right?
I'm just getting aware of our timing. So not to cut the conversation short, but we do like to live within this podcast and webinar within the 30 to 45-minute mark. And we've just approached our 35 minutes. So I just wanted to ask the group if there's any last remarks, closing remarks that you guys wanted to bring up around this topic of authenticity.
Go, Molly, go.
No, I was just going to say, it sounds to me, linking this back to what we do practically as well, is it sounds like, how can we practically live in the society, be at ease with this authenticity or these masks or whatever else? There are always three things at play, which we're all touching on, which is awareness of the self in the space. What can I do? Where are these masks coming up for me? What can I wear? What's my uniform? The awareness of my audience. What impact do I want to make on that person? And how does that affect myself in that space? And then the content. What is the material that I'm talking about? And how can that honor the kind of triangle of communication of me, them, and what? And that's literally how we basically structure our training. Is we spend some weeks talking about ourselves, we spend some weeks talking about how we then introduce it into our environment and then see how that shapes it. And I think maybe something that we're all hitting on, but just to kind of round it off, is it sounds like we're all talking about how authenticity can look different in all of those three things, but together they create that authentic response in that moment. Even if I may not wear, I wear really slouchy stuff all of the time, it wouldn't be authentic to wear that stuff if I was mirrored with someone that I wanted to impress in that business meeting. That wouldn't feel authentic to do that almost. So there's also something about these different levels of impacting, and why authentic is so icky, because it feels like there's just one way of being, and actually all of those factors mean it's continually changing through our years, but also our environment day to day.
Yeah, it's so well said, Molly. I was going to say something similar, just in the sense that what seems to be coming up a lot today, and what something that the four of us have in common, is we've spent a lot of time in our training and our education and in our day-to-day lives. We reflect a lot. We self-reflect a lot. Our awareness of self, we are constantly going through those practices to be able to articulate that, to be able to understand when that feeling is going on within our body. And so I think that there's also a bit of this presumption that everybody has that, which is not true. We've spent decades training to increase our awareness of self, physically, vocally, emotionally, spiritually. And so I think that's why it's so important within the first step of our training, is that we actually spend some time diving into that, investigating what that is, because it's imperative to then understand how you're going to create any of the moves moving forward. And without spending that time of understanding self, it's impossible to write the next few chapters.
Yeah, it's quite impossible to hide with what we're trying to do with the now and some of the training that we've all had. You have to show up, and you have to be prepared and ready to work and be your most authentic self. So not to round it off that way. Does anyone have any last closing remarks that they'd like to bring up? Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone, for a lovely podcast. I hope you listeners had a really, really enjoyable experience with this one, and tune in for our question next week or the following week. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.